So let's address the elephant in the room. Last week, I turned 20. So about a week ago, I turned 20, and I was sitting around a bunch of my hometown friends, and I was looking around at my friends, and these are people I've known since I was literally 8 in daycare, or since my freshman year of high school, and I just realized we're all in our 20s now. Like, what? Like, who let that happen? I feel like I'm at a real turning point in my life right now. And because of that, I've found myself looking back on the previous chapters of my life to help me understand how I've gotten to where I'm at. So this is going to be a video explaining my superhero origin story and a video explaining my broad goals for my 20s. So from year 0 to 13, I consider this peak childhood. I was a goofy goober. Like, the only thing that mattered to me was having fun. I'm talking hours upon hours of playing League of Legends, watching and rewatching all of the available episodes of One Piece, and going to local Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments for years without winning a single tournament. In my defense, I was an elementary schooler playing a children's card game against grown-ass men. I don't remember much about my intricate thoughts at the time. All I can remember is not having a care in the world. Anyways, it was a really great time, but I took it for granted because I was a stupid, unaware kid. Like I always say, childhood is wasted on children. Moving on to the next phase of my life, when I was 14 and 15, late middle school and early high school, I consider this my self-help phase. I became really enthralled by self-help, and I absolutely idolized guys like Eric Thomas, Ty Lopez, Brian Tracy, Kobe Bryant, and Elliot Hulse, though Elliot Hulse is kind of crazy now. All of these motivational self-help guys became like idols to me because they all touted the similar idea that I could become great, and being great would make me special. At the same time, I really started to develop goals for the first time in my life, and this definitely wasn't a coincidence. Having goals made me more interested in self-help, and being more interested in self-help made me set more goals. I began hitting the gym relatively consistently, and I began waking up pretty early most mornings so that I could work on math counts stuff because I really wanted to be good at math counts. And this is the first thing I ever remember in my life. And this is the first thing in my life I really remember grinding on outside of playing video games. And I started playing volleyball a lot, which would become like a defining characteristic over the next couple years. All of this being said, I was still very much the League of Legends and anime-loving kid I used to be. I definitely had goals now, and I worked harder, but rarely consistently and hard enough to achieve the goals that I'd really set for myself. Looking back on these years and trying to understand why I was so into self-help and why I found that so interesting, I just see a much more insecure version of myself with a pretty big superiority complex. And I had latched on to this idea that if I worked really hard and just became great, whether that was becoming really successful or making a lot of money, then I would be really special, and that would make me worth something. Then, during my junior and senior year of high school, when I was 16 and 17, I consider these my existentially fraught years. This was a really interesting time period in my life because when you're younger, you have all of this potential. Like, I entered high school with the fantasies of being like the best debater in the state, or being one of the best volleyball players in the state, and just being like some type of genius. And as you get older, you realize some of that potential, but more often than not, I think you fall short of the fantasies and dreams that you had for yourself. I was a solid volleyball player, but not even close to being the best on my team. I was a decent debater, but not great. I did really well in school, but I was by no means a genius. I still managed to accomplish some pretty cool things, and on paper, I would say I did pretty well for myself. But at some point during my junior year, I realized I didn't have any real purpose for my self-growth journey. All of this stuff I was working on, school, going to the gym, volleyball, debate, they all kind of just started being things that I should do. Especially during my junior year, I got stuck in like this existential vacuum. I was doing things to like a relative degree of success, but I just had no idea why I was doing them. It felt like I was just trying to be better with no real end goal in sight. And that just like killed all of the motivation I had to do anything. And I realized the insane amount of sheer willpower and effort it would take to become like the best at some of the things that I was doing. And I just realized that I did not care enough about any of the things that I was doing to put in that much work. So in response, I distracted myself from these feelings of existential dread by playing video games, hanging out with friends, or watching anime. But to be fair, it's not like I was constantly suffering. Like, I absolutely loved quarantine because it allowed me to be an absolute degenerate and kind of like a kid again, where all I had to do was worry about having fun. But looking back, I see that my life was characterized by this weird mix of directionless hedonism and curiosity. And during this time period of my life, I remember being really interested in certain things and certain questions, and that was probably the one productive bright spot I can remember about those 2 years. Like, I got really interested in Andrew Yang's universal basic income, and I also got really interested in like drug legalization and whether or not we should legalize drugs or criminalize drugs, and how we have absolutely lost the war on drugs. The drugs have won. I just remember that there were moments during those 2 years where I felt really interested and really engaged with the world, and it's because I found topics that I thought were really interesting. But the questions that I was interested in were pretty different from each other and pretty broad. And while I enjoyed the questions, they didn't like lead me in any particular direction that I really enjoyed. Anyways, before quarantine, this is pretty much what I wrote my Common App essay about. I wrote about this existential dread, and in my Common App essay, I remember writing that the answer to my existential crisis was learning. But realistically, I was stuck in existential freefall for many months after finishing my Common App essay. Looking back now on that time period of my life, it makes sense to me why I was never the best debater or volleyball player. And it's not necessarily because of a lack of talent, though I don't necessarily think I was super talented. It's because I would say that being great for the sake of being great and just like working hard for the sake of working hard never really mattered to me. The next year of my life was when I was 18, and this was my gap year. And oh my God, there is so much that happened on my gap year that I could probably talk about this for an hour straight. I switched my planned major from CS to psychology. I wrote a novel. I traveled around the country, and I met some really, really cool individuals. But I would say that all of these changes and things that I did were because of a larger change that happened in my life, which is that I finally started to put in real work to find answers to these existential questions that had always plagued me. I learned about the nature of happiness and fulfillment. I remember viscerally the feeling of pure peace as I would wake up in the morning, sip on my mug of hot tea, and write until the sun came up. I learned what I think the meaning of life is. Spoiler, it's to be integrated within networks of people and produce some good for them. I experienced what it truly felt like to just be in the moment and appreciate my life. I also like to think that I became way more, unbelievably more emotionally intelligent, both for myself and others. I became a lot more empathetic, kind, and compassionate, I think. Looking back on my gap year, I learned so much about who I was and what I valued and what I wanted my life to be. But most importantly, I built the existential foundation that gave my life some type of direction and meaning. Transition then from my gap year to my freshman year of college. This was a huge transition for me because during my gap year and during high school, I had a plethora of alone time. But in college, it felt like I was rarely truly alone. Being constantly around the noise and lives of other people just took a lot of adjusting for me. Figuring out how I wanted to spend my time and balance everything from school, a social life, healthy sleeping habits, I didn't have any. And just my own personal writing and YouTube channel took a lot of really deliberate decisions. And those decisions weren't necessarily easy to make. So in contrast to my gap year, where I think I learned what I wanted my life to be in a vacuum when I was alone, I think my freshman year was a lot more about how I wanted my life to look like in the context of real people in the world. This leads me into the second realization of my freshman year, which is sacrifice. Growing up, it felt like I was able to do everything that I wanted to do. I would go to school, occasionally scoop some ice cream, go to clubs, practice volleyball or whatever, and I would come home and I would still have plenty of time to do literally everything I wanted. But that just isn't true anymore. At this point, anytime I make a decision to do something, I am actively deciding not to do something else. Opportunity cost is very real. When I look back on this first year of college, I honestly kind of just consider it a warm-up year because it took so much energy for me to adjust living around others and for me to figure out what I really wanted my life to look like when I was around other people. So now I'm 20 and I've been asking myself, what are my hopes for the next 10 years of my life? So I guess this is the decade where I truly transitioned from being a kid to being my own person who isn't completely dependent on other people. So the other day I backed into a car during my road trip and I left a dent in the car. So I screwed up and I was trying to figure out how I was going to deal with this and pay for it. And honestly, it ate me up. I was incredibly stressed. But I called my parents and they kind of told me, don't worry, we'll take care of it. It felt like I was a 6-year-old on the playground crying for my parents to come and fix everything for me. As much as I always think about being my own person and figuring out what I want in life, everything I have done so far in my life has been under the direct support and protection of my parents. I understand how reliant on my family I am, but I want this decade to be the time where I can really show my parents that the effort and the work that they've put into me has paid off. And I think that the best way I can do this is to truly become my own person and learn how to live in the world without being really dependent on others. Simply put, this means I need to work harder. I've had the time periods in my life where I've just been carefree and done nothing but try to have fun, but that can't be my 20s. I have ambitions and goals that I need to work towards now if I want to realize them. And this is not to say that I will never party or have fun again. I definitely am way too lazy to just become a workaholic, but I just have to grow up. And I think I'm just starting to come to terms with what responsibility and sacrifice really mean. And I think I'm more ready now than ever to make those sacrifices to achieve the things that I want. And when I look back on my 20s and make one of these videos when I turn 30, I want to feel like I put in the blood, sweat, and tears to lay the foundations of all of the things I'm going to accomplish later in life. That being said, Mom, if you ever watch this video 10 years from now, because I'm probably going to wait 10 years to show it to you, I really hope you're proud of me.